In 2007, a computer scientist named Luis von Ahn sat down and worked out how much of the world's time he was wasting. He had helped invent the CAPTCHA a few years earlier, the small, distorted word you type in to prove you're a person. By his count, people were solving about 200 million of them every day. Each one took roughly 10 seconds. That came to something in the region of 500,000 hours of human attention every day, spent proving to computers that we existed. His response was to put the time to work. He rewired the system so that one of the two words you typed was not a test at all. It was a scanned word from an old book or newspaper that optical character recognition had failed to read. You were not only proving you were human, you were digitizing the archives of the New York Times, a few letters at a time, several 100 million times a day, for nothing. Google bought it in 2009. Within a few years, the words were replaced by house numbers, photographed by street view cars, and then by grids of pictures where you were asked to click every square containing a traffic light, or a crosswalk, or a bus. None of this was hidden. It just was not the part anyone paid attention to. The story of how artificial intelligence became possible is usually told as a story about ideas. It isn't one. The core mathematics was finished in the 1980s. Backpropagation, the method that lets you train a stack of layers rather than a single one, was published in a form the field could use in 1986. From that point forward, the recipe was complete. What followed wasn't a search for a better idea, it was a wait. What the recipe needed was examples. These systems don't learn from rules, they learn from instances. The way a child learns what a dog is by seeing 400 dogs, rather than by reading a definition. And in 1986, there were no instances. The standard research data sets of that era contained a few thousand images. A few thousand. You cannot teach anything to see the world on a few thousand pictures, and there was no way to get more, because photographs were physical objects, and labeling them was a job somebody had to be paid to do. So the field sat still for 20 years, not because it was stuck, but because it was waiting for a supply of something no institution could afford to manufacture. Then several 100 million people bought cameras that fit in their pockets and started giving the pictures away. In 2007, a researcher at Princeton named Fei Li began assembling what became ImageNet. The finished collection held around 14 million photographs sorted into roughly 22,000 categories. She didn't take the photographs. She scraped them from the open internet, which by then contained more images than anyone could count. And then she had them labeled by close to 50,000 people in more than 160 countries, hired in small increments through Amazon's Mechanical Turk. Colleagues told her it was a waste of a career. The prevailing view was that progress would come from better algorithms, and that gathering data was clerical work. In 2012, a team at Toronto trained a network called AlexNet on that collection, using 2 consumer graphics cards bought for gaming. It cut the error rate on the image recognition benchmark by roughly 10 percentage points in a single year, which in that field was not an improvement, it was a rupture. Every serious research group changed direction within about 18 months. The architecture they used was decades old. The graphics cards were sold to teenagers. The only genuinely new ingredient was the labeled photographs, and the labeled photographs came from us. Amazon's Mechanical Turk, the marketplace that supplied the labor, is named after a machine built in 1770 by Wolfgang von Kempelen. It was presented as an automaton that could play chess, and it toured the courts of Europe, defeating aristocrats. Inside the cabinet Folded into a compartment beneath the board was a human chess player. Amazon chose the name deliberately and described the service as artificial intelligence. That is the actual marketing language. What happened next was the same pattern applied to text, and it happened so quickly that most people missed that it was the same pattern. Language models need writing, and by the 2010s, the internet held more written English than had existed in all of previous history. Wikipedia, assembled by volunteers. Stack Overflow, where working programmers answered each other's questions carefully and for free because that was the culture. Reddit, 20 years of arguments, fan fiction archives, recipe blogs with long personal preambles that everyone complained about, product reviews, forum posts from 2004 about how to fix a specific dishwasher. GPT-3, released in 2020, was trained on something on the order of 300 billion tokens drawn largely from that pool. Not one of the people who wrote a careful Stack Overflow answer in 2011 was contributing to a commercial product. They were helping a stranger with a compiler error. And here I should be plain about the mechanics of how the companies turned this into revenue, because the arrangement was different at each of them, and the differences matter more than the general complaint does. Google gave away unlimited photo storage from 2015 until 2021, and in return received an enormous, continuously refreshed, personally curated collection of images that users had sorted, deleted the bad versions of, and often named. Facebook introduced photo tagging as a social feature, and every time you identified a friend in a picture, you supplied a labeled face. By 2014, the company's deepface system was matching faces at around 97% accuracy, trained on about 4 million images of roughly 4,000 people, all of it drawn from the platform. Microsoft acquired GitHub in 2018 and later launched Copilot, trained on the public repositories hosted there, which meant developers who had published open source under licenses requiring attribution found their work inside a subscription product that attributed nothing. NVIDIA, alone among them, never needed anyone's data at all and became the most valuable company in the world by selling the shovels. The exchange was legal. It was described in most cases in terms of service documents that were written to be technically accurate and practically unread. You were compensated too, just not in money. You were paid in free storage, free search, free maps, free email, free video hosting. For most people, that was a reasonable trade at the time, and many would make it again. What's changed is that the supply has become the constraint again. The open internet is finite, and the frontier labs have effectively finished it. What's left is either low quality, already used, or locked behind a login. So the material that was free for 15 years has been repriced. In 2024, Reddit signed a licensing arrangement with Google reported at around $60 million a year. News Corp signed with OpenAI. The Associated Press, Axel Springer, Shutterstock, the Financial Times, all of them concluded similar deals. Publishers who spent a decade being told their content was worthless, without distribution, discovered it was worth a great deal as training material. The people who wrote the Reddit posts weren't party to that negotiation. There's a second thing that hasn't gone away, and it's less visible than the data question. The models that feel coherent, that answer politely, and refuse the wrong requests and hold a conversation, don't get that way from the training data. They get that way from a process where human beings read model outputs and rate them thousands of times over, teaching the system which of its own responses a person would prefer. That work is done by contractors. It's hourly, Companies like Scale AI and Surge built substantial businesses on it, and a considerable portion of it is performed in Kenya, the Philippines, and India, at wages that have been the subject of repeated investigative reporting. So the automaton still has someone inside the cabinet. The compartment is just distributed across several continents now, and the person in it is on a contract. This is the answer to why it works now and didn't before, and it has very little to do with anyone getting smarter. 3 things had to arrive, and only one of them came from the field itself. The chips came from video games. The data came from ordinary people conducting their ordinary lives in public. The architectures improved too, and that part was real research. But it was the smallest of the 3 contributions, and it arrived last. Artificial intelligence didn't become possible because we solved a hard problem. It became possible because a few billion people spent 20 years producing an unprecedented record of human thought and expression for reasons that had nothing to do with machines, and a small number of companies were positioned to collect it. Every time you corrected an autocorrect, you cast a vote about how a word should be spelled. Every time you skipped a song 8 seconds in, you rated it. Every time you clicked the traffic lights, you annotated a frame for a vision system. Every time you told a chatbot its answer was wrong and it apologized, you produced a training signal worth more than the conversation. The technology is genuinely new. The inputs weren't. Right now, as this is being said, there are people sitting at desks, reading pairs of AI-generated answers, and deciding which one is better. They're paid by the hour. Their names don't appear anywhere in the product, and the models they're shaping will be described, on release, as having learned it themselves.